All right, everyone, I'm just starting recording. Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the last phase of our mitigation series webinars. This week we're looking at lessons learned in 2020 and what to expect moving forward. Okay, so the first thing that I want to kind of talk to you guys about is what the actual review process looks like for BRIC. So the first thing that happens is the technical review. And the technical review is actually performed by FEMA staff. And just so everyone is aware, and this information is available, and you can look at that technical evaluation criteria link for more information. But the review is done, so one, done by FEMA staff, but two, the technical review criteria are binary point awards, so your projects are either going to receive the full points allotted or none of the points for each criteria. So keep that in mind. Here's where it gets a little bit interesting, personally, I think. The other part of the review that FEMA has started to do for these BRIC programs, and of course last year was the first year, is what they're calling a Qualitative National Review Panel. So what happens is this year it was obviously virtual, and FEMA recruited volunteers from state, local, tribal, and territorial governments and other federal agencies so we could all participate in 3 week-long qualitative review panels. So the idea behind this is increased transparency of the review process and the decision-making process behind the grant program, and enhance partnerships among all of the agencies and local jurisdictions involved in the panel. So the expectations for this qualitative review panel is that the panelists and volunteers are expected to leverage their mitigation experience and their subject matter expertise to evaluate the degree to which all of the sub-applicants meet the 6 BRIC qualitative evaluation criteria. So those 6 areas are risk reduction and resiliency effectiveness, future conditions, implementation measures, population impacted, outreach activities, and leveraging partners. So MEMA actually participated in the BRIC National Review Panel. I was a representative. I served a week on the review panel. I was able to review around 25 sub-applications, very informative. And I will say that this graphic right here about the sub-application activity is definitely what I experienced to be true. The majority of the sub-applications that I reviewed were certainly for flood control mitigation activities, but we did see a fair number of these other categories. So to look at it a little bit closer, look at the data of all the sub-applications. FEMA received 991 sub-applications, and again, these were all of the different types of mitigation activities that were mentioned in the sub-applications, just to give you a general idea. And if you click on these, once you receive the slides after today's presentation, you can see the data in a little bit more detail, but this is just to give you an idea of what all of the different states submitted in fiscal year 20, just to give you an idea of how much funding is being asked for where, and how competitive the BRIC program really is already and is going to continue to be. Okay, so for my personal experience kind of report out to all of you, I did find the review panel to be a worthwhile use of time, certainly. I was able to gain a lot more experience and insight into the BRIC program and the decision-making process, and I think that was very valuable to me as someone who worked for MEMA, but also to all of you. So I'm going to do my best to give you an idea of what I was able to take away from that experience so that it can help inform your process for this upcoming cycle. So the constructive feedback on the grant program of BRIC in general, offered by all of the review panelists, was things that we were seeing, like the common pitfalls of nature-based solutions. So something that we noticed was that nature-based solutions were mentioned by a lot of sub-applicants in the alternatives considered section of the sub-application, but ultimately they weren't pursued because they were more technically difficult. They were potentially more expensive with upfront costs, and there isn't a lot of history of successful case studies that sub-applicants were able to reference for evidence of success to really build that case to support the use of nature-based solutions. So that's something that we certainly brought up to the FEMA representatives. Of course, the 25% cost share requirement is a considerable roadblock to a lot of sub-applicants who are applying to the BRIC program. Even if a community qualified for that 90%, 10% cost share split based on small impoverished community status, that's still a hardship. So something we discussed. And we also discussed the BCA methodology and some suggested improvements. There's a lot of detail about that FEMA's released in the Stakeholder feedback report, which can be accessed via this link. I do recommend that you give that a look and a review after this presentation. I think it's very helpful to know the concerns that are being brought up and to inform your process for your sub-applications for this cycle. Scalability was also something that we as review panelists kind of experienced difficulty with. It was pretty difficult to score an acquisition and demolition project for 2 properties versus, you know, a tornado safe room that doubles as a mass care shelter to house hundreds of people in a hazardous event. So that was a little bit difficult and something to note. And this is not constructive criticism in any way, but just to note, the National Review Panelist Group was very diverse and representative of a wide variety of agencies. So a couple of things to take away from that information is that, one, you should definitely take that as a cue to build a diverse project team, right, with multiple groups and agencies as your partners, because the people who are reading these sub-applications and giving this qualitative review are from, you know, not only just local jurisdictions and local emergency management offices, but also Department of Energy. And so it's important to keep that in mind, because you absolutely should take advantage of that while building your projects, giving that diverse perspective. And also, it's really critical that you keep that piece of information in mind as you write your sub-application, remembering that the people who are reading your sub-application are not just mitigation specialists, which, one, plays to all of our advantages in these projects, but keeping that in mind so that you are really detailing out all of your points in your sub-application. Nothing should be assumed that it is self-explanatory. Definitely go into detail with your project information. Okay, so in terms of panelist feedback, in my experience, that I would like to give to all of you specifically, is that as review panelists going through all of these sub-applications, we definitely notice that more attention needs to be given to leveraging partnerships effectively. So one thing that I don't know that a lot of people realized in the fiscal year 20 cycle was that The ways in which you leverage partnerships are not limited to a cash match. Yes, it would be fantastic if all of your partners could bring funding to the table. However, you're not limited to partnerships that only bring that cash match with them. You can still leverage partnerships really effectively, build a diverse and robust project sub-application with different organizations, and that's just going to strengthen your project. So keep that in mind. Some of the sub-applications that I was able to review were really creative in that they were leveraging university partners, use of research project studies, consultations with experts from the local universities, and they really partnered with local communities to have discussions, which all really strengthened their sub-applications. Another thing that really wasn't accurately or effectively addressed by a lot of sub-applicants across the board was the social vulnerability aspect. So when thinking about social vulnerability, it's really important to view the project area and impacted population through an expansive lens. So don't just leave it as this is a historically underserved population that lives in this community. The more data that you can offer, the better. So one of the sub-applications that I reviewed, it was a very small town, so the data that they had was fairly limited. But what they could say was that here are the number of community members who rely on oxygen to survive. So we need this generator at our community center because in the event of a hazardous event, when we lose power, these are people who absolutely need access to that critical infrastructure in order to survive. So that was just a piece of the data that they could bring to the table to really explain and take advantage of the information that they did have. So one of the errors that a lot of sub-applicants made is that the context that was provided in documentation for all of the answers that are asked in FEMA Go weren't actually included in the FEMA Go boxes. They were included as attached documents. Now, this is not a mistake we want to make for several reasons. One, if you use the FEMA Go system last cycle, you know that obviously there's some growing pains with the format and the technology, and we didn't have a delete function. So if you uploaded documentation that you then saw an error with or needed to remove, you couldn't remove it. You just kind of had to relabel it as, you know, this is not the current version or something like that. So one, there were a lot of sub-applicants who had a great many documents attached to their sub-application, which made it difficult for qualitative review panelists to really go through and kind of effectively and thoroughly gather all of that information for that sub-application. And that leads to a lot of, you know, information and opportunities missed, which is not something that we want to take a chance with. And that's something simple and easy that we can do to make sure that all of our critical information is being accessed by the right people, and that all of the time that all of your spending on these sub-applications for your community members doesn't go to waste because of human error. And then additional stakeholder feedback from the fiscal year 20 BRIC cycle can be found at this link, this summary of stakeholder feedback report. Again, I think it's a worthwhile read. I think it's about 6 pages, and it's just important information to keep in mind. Okay, so looking at kind of these areas that a lot of sub-applicants didn't effectively address in their sub-applications, leveraging partnerships, right? We talked about that, how there was a lot of opportunity missed there. So this information here on the slide is specifically what FEMA provides in this qualitative review criterion document, which again is linked here for your convenience. And I absolutely recommend going through the entirety of it so that you can really build the strongest sub-applications you possibly can. So one, again, it's important to remember that partnerships can take a lot of different forms. And yes, they can contribute financially, but potentially more importantly, addressing that factor of generating community-wide awareness for the risks and the proposal design. So we were asked as panelists to question what partners were involved in project designs, how did these partners contribute to the application, what partners are going to contribute to the implementation of the project after it's potentially awarded. So, and to what extent were non-governmental organizations, universities, private organizations, and other government entities consulted for advice or assistance? Again, these are further examples of ways to leverage partnerships that a lot of sub-applicants weren't taking advantage of. So while there were a lot of sub-applicants that were missing this critical piece of the sub-application, there definitely were a few creative ways that I saw partnerships being leveraged. Again, applying those studies and input from subject matter experts and published reports from university academic departments like your geology department, et cetera. There's also a few examples of local tourism organizations being asked for their input and recommendations, and even collecting some feedback from visitors and residents from the local areas. And those are further examples of those partnerships being leveraged effectively. How has collaboration with surrounding jurisdictions supported project development? What extent have other federal programs or funding sources been leveraged? And to what extent have partners provided funding that increases the non-federal cost share? Again, of course, if your partnerships can bring a cash match to the table, that's great. And how have these partnerships really been used to increase community resiliency, right? That part's key. So what potential exists for these partnerships to continue beyond implementation of the project too? So we want to see those efforts continue effectively. And then for the population impacted, some prompts for that criteria that we were given as review panelists were to look at community size, scale, and definition. Those things can look very different in different local contexts. So what does community-wide really mean in the context of these proposed projects, and was that defined effectively? And what % of the population will directly benefit from the project being implemented? Is our direct community-wide benefits going to be experienced, and how is that estimate being calculated in the sub-application? So again, keep all of these questions in mind, because those are the questions that your reviewers are being asked to keep in mind when looking at your sub-application. Other things to keep in mind that we were asked to review: what's the extent of the project's expected direct and indirect impacts? How will the project reduce cascading impacts to community lifelines, residents, businesses, public services, infrastructure, and natural systems? And looking at the most vulnerable members of the community where the project is proposed, asking how the project will potentially negatively impact vulnerable members of the community. How will the project positively impact vulnerable members of the community? And then keeping in mind, impacts are not just the direct impacts, but there's also ancillary impacts. So This is helpful to keep in mind because you are able to discuss, the social, environmental, and economic positive impacts of a project for your reviewers to really take into consideration. Okay, so given all of that information and insight, best practices moving forward for the fiscal year 21 cycle. Before the application opens, right, make sure that we are all aware of the difference between the state and federal deadlines. So when you see information coming out from FEMA, those deadlines are for the state, right? So those materials are giving a deadline that we as a state have to meet. However, your deadlines as sub-applicants are going to be earlier so that MEMA has a chance to review those before the state deadline. So the sub-applications from you will be due to us, MEMA, about 2 months before that FEMA deadline. So really check in, make sure that the deadlines that are on your calendar match ours. So we can make sure that everything that needs to happen before the FEMA deadline closes happens. Definitely review the FEMA NOFO, that Notice of Funding Opportunity, in detail to make sure you're prepared to meet all of the grant requirements for the upcoming cycle. And the NOFOs are going to be available at this link here. And make sure you create an account and register for FEMA Go. And when you register for that account, notify us at the mitigation.mema@maryland.gov email address once you register, because there are things on our end that we then need to do to make sure that you are set up in the system. And when you register for FEMA Go, you're going to need to obtain your organization's DUNS number. And again, here is the link for you to register and some resources and guides should you want and need them. Right now, we're in a really important time period where we have a little bit of time to review the FEMA sub-application templates for your proposed activity types. And you have the time now, if possible, to start compiling the necessary data and documentation for your sub-application. So the other thing that you're going to need to do in order to continue on with the process is submit notice of inform to MEMA, the NOI, for pre-screening. And really this just serves as, the NOI is a Google form, and it serves as an overview of your proposed activity, and really just provides us with an opportunity to evaluate your proposed project for eligibility and give some feedback. And the NOI can be accessed at this link here, this direct link, and also if you just navigate to the MEMA mitigation website, you'll be able to find your way there as well. So this is what that NOI form is going to look like here on the right-hand side. Again, it's a simple form, isn't exhaustive by any means. And once again, the deadline for submitting this NOI is August 31st. So make sure you submit those forms to us by then. And as you can kind of see here, it's not just for BRIC, but for FMA too. Okay, so while you're getting your ideas together for your proposed projects, one of the resources that FEMA offers is the Mitigation Action Portfolio, which is kind of a PDF booklet document that has compiled case studies from all over the country. It is organized by hazard, so it's helpful as you kind of go through it. And it really aligns projects with community lifelines, which is helpful and can definitely help inform you as you compile all of your data and documentation for your proposed project. It includes details like the scope, cost, funding sources, partners, and timelines that were used for the projects. and it is updated periodically. And some more best practices, right? So build upon existing efforts. Don't need to reinvent the wheel every single time. Seek out those multidisciplinary solutions. Identify commonalities and bring in the additional partners and stakeholders, as much as you can. Explore different regional opportunities that are occurring. That's really going to help you take that whole community approach. Remember that expertise can be found in government, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, academia, etc. Make sure you're utilizing all of those available resources. And prioritize mitigating community lifelines to increase community resilience. And then this is the timeline for this upcoming cycle. Now, just note that right now we can only offer it tentatively, right? Because we have not received the NOFO from FEMA, hasn't been released yet. So tentatively, keep these in mind, August 31st, that's a definite. Turn in that NOI to us, that Google form. Hopefully, September 2021, the NOFO will be released and become available to all of you. That's the latest information that we have from FEMA to expect it in September. October 2021, FEMA Go sub-applications are available. And then in November, the sub-applications are due to MEMA. And then January, early February, that's when we can expect the state application to be due to FEMA. Okay, so that's really the overview on the best practices and the information that I can give you an insight from my experience as a National Review Panelist member for the Qualitative Review. And hopefully that information is helpful as you start building your sub-applications and looking into your proposed projects. And while we still have the time, are there any questions anybody would like to pose? I don't see anything in the chat. Well, if there are no questions now, definitely know that we are available by phone, by email, to answer questions as they come up during the process. Oh, okay. We have a question.
And Jeanette, if you want to come off mute and turn your camera on, and feel free to introduce yourself to our stakeholders as well too. I think that'd be fantastic.
Thank you so much, Jelisa and Kayla. Thanks, Kayla, for the really wonderful overview. I think a lot of the questions that I had were already answered, but I wanted to just give a small introduction. My name is Jeanette Tapia, and I'm here representing the Dutch Resilience Hub, which is a group of organizations in the Netherlands and also in the USA with Dutch roots that work in the applied research sector, in urban resilience, sustainable urbanism, flood management, and all of those, topics that we see are integral to these efforts. And we have some firms that are in organizations, institutions that are really open to collaborate on this. But I was wondering if this is also open for international organizations to team up with local parties on this for these proposals.
Thanks, Janet. Jelisa, did you want to take that one?
The question that just came up in the chat. Sorry.
No. So Janet had some questions about the possibility for organizations to internationally to team up with local parties for proposals.
Okay. Sorry, I started reading the question in the chat. So yeah, right. That's exactly what we're trying to promote through the BRIC program this year. is I feel like for the types of projects and initiatives that FEMA is really focusing on trying to prioritize with this program. So they're looking for innovative approaches. They are looking at how can we do large scale infrastructure. And of course, infrastructure is like the hot topic across the nation right now. And with the age of a lot of our communities here in Maryland being on the East Coast, we have a lot of failing infrastructure as well too, which then leads to a lot of additional issues. So I definitely think that for our communities in Maryland, it is an area where a lot of our like local communities, especially in the emergency management offices, they might only have 1 or 2 people that handle emergency management and emergency services too. And so I do think that it's very important to be able to build partnerships with a lot of our communities so that they can get that technical assistance needed to, you know, form these types of large scale innovative projects that are going to be prioritized under BRIC.
Thank you very much for the response. And are international parties able to team up with local parties in Maryland on these proposals? Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yep. So essentially the eligible sub-applicants are only state agencies and then local governments. And so the local government would just serve as the lead and actually apply for the projects, but they can definitely partner with international organizations, nonprofits, and private sector, academia, and the list goes on.
Thank you very much, ladies.
All right. And for everybody, I'll also send Janet's contact information and more about her organization and our follow-up email after this. So for Carrie's question, could you go over the FEMA funding and BRIC application submission slide again and provide a more detailed overview of the number of applications that were submitted and the dollar amount FEMA expects to award? So the dollar amount last year when we submitted applications, that was at $500 million. Typically, the amount does not change. And if the amount of available funding that's going to be awarded does change, there will be numerous press releases directly from FEMA. We'll also let people know. But right now, because they are so close to providing the awards and that they haven't increased that amount, I anticipate that it is going to remain at $500 million. So they roughly received $3.6 billion in federal share requests. So obviously the 3.6 billion compared to the 500 million that is available, it is going to be extremely competitive. The update that we received yesterday is that FEMA is aiming for late July to start releasing the decisions if you did apply for a grant last year. The number of applications, so altogether they submitted, they received 991 applications. So yes, basically the gist of all this information, right, is that it's definitely competitive. So I don't want anyone to come in here with the idea that, you know, it is not a competitive grant and that is going to be straightforward. It's definitely competitive, but I would also encourage you that FEMA is really aiming to be very innovative right now. And I think that they are really looking hard at the types of projects that are being submitted and different things like that. So I keep saying to people, this is the prime opportunity to basically like throw the spaghetti to the wall, see what's going to stick, because this is the greatest flexibility we've seen in a mitigation program at the federal level since the inception of the programs roughly 30 years ago. So I think if you have some of those out of the box mitigation ideas, like shoot for it, put together the application while FEMA is still, you know, developing this program to see what it's going to look like.
And then I'm just going to jump in to let you know, Carrie, that so last cycle, fiscal year 20, $500 million was on the table. For this upcoming cycle, it has been kind of released that FEMA is expecting to have $1 billion available. So still obviously going to be very competitive considering the first year of the grant program saw $3.6 billion in application totals submitted. but they did double the amount that they are offering into that national competition. So hopefully that's helpful. Any other questions? If you wanted to pop it in the chat or to unmute yourself and ask.
And I would strongly encourage you guys to ask questions now. Do not wait until we end this webinar to then email us, because it's going to be you and about 50 other people emailing us at one time. So we can answer questions while you have us here on the line as well too. If you do feel like your question is like super complicated and very project specific, you can still feel free to ask it right now. And if it requires that we provide some additional technical assistance offline, we can do that. All right, Kayla, I am not seeing or hearing anything. So I expect our NOIs to be completed and us to get a bunch of them. But no, seriously, please do complete the notice of interest form. We are not looking for a fully fleshed out project when you submit that form to us. It really is for us to start screening it and making sure that we can provide assistance and feedback as early as possible, so that you do put yourself in a position to be very competitive in the national competition. Okay, so Carrie says, is the BRIC program based on the amount of federal disaster dollars spent, correct? So yes, the way that the legislation is written, so this program was authorized under the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018. So that piece of legislation states that 6% of the previous year's disaster expenses will be set aside for the BRIC program. And there it does list which programs it's going to count the expenses for and stuff like that. So 6% is being set aside. However, the legislation does not mandate what amount of that 6% must be made available each year for the program. So 6% is set aside. There is no mandate to the minimum amount that should be made available each year. All right.
One more. We have a question from Brian. So the NOI form, it is available on our website, but we will send these slides out after the presentation, and you can click on the links just directly in the slide, just for your convenience. And Jaleesa's popped it in the chat for us as well. Okay. Would climate resiliency and adaptation projects be considered as an innovative mitigation project? So I need a little bit more detail.
So I don't know whether you can hear me or not. I'm Hassan Badr from the Prince George's County Office of Homeland Security. So like the green drainage system as a, like for the flash flood management, or like wastewater management for the future as a sustainable development. I'm thinking about that specific projects as a mitigation strategy for the so that was my main question. So there are tons of like projects that we can use as a sustainable development for mitigation, but I was just curious to know that whether those types of projects would be considered as like innovative projects for this type of like the grants or not.
So I would 100% say yes. So in addition to that, the federal administration, the current federal administration and FEMA, essentially there are kind of two major priorities that they've come out with now, are focused around addressing climate change impacts, and then also addressing equity within the hazard mitigation assistance programs as well too. So with the project that you just described, it definitely addresses, the impacts from climate change. The BRIC program itself does a lot of promotion to encourage nature-based solutions as well too. So I would definitely say something like that would meet a lot of those federal priorities. And then the other thing I would encourage you to do is also look at how your project starts to address the FEMA community lifelines, because that is going to be another priority and another way where you can score additional points when the project is submitted to FEMA.
Thank you.
All right. Hearing and seeing no more additional questions, I just want to take a second to thank you all so much for participating in these webinars that we've been having during the month of June. Today is the last one. So these webinars are essentially meant to kind of offer you some foundational knowledge as you begin to identify various projects that you might want to pursue under BRIC and FMA. So I know that we, have a lot of focus and do a lot in regards to the BRIC program, but don't forget that the FMA flood mitigation assistance is a solid program where you can do a lot of flood mitigation activities as well too. As we progress through this grant cycle, we will have additional technical assistance webinars to focus more specifically on the application itself, and then navigating that FEMA Go system as well too. Apart from that, again, please make sure that you submit your notice of interest to us. And if you do have any subsequent follow-up questions or need assistance, please feel free to reach out to myself, Kayla Cornell, or else Nevin Stambaugh, who presented last week. And then general questions, you can also send them to mitigation.mema@maryland.gov. And that will be received by all of us as well too. So again, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you all have a nice day.